panelists, if you wouldn't mind just saying your name and a little bit about your background.
So I'm Francine Hardway. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been married 5 times. And I'm also a foster parent, and that probably says it all about work-life balance.
My name is Agersea. I'm married for 7 years now, and I've been an entrepreneur for all that time, probably 10 years.
What's your Twitter handle? Sorry.
Tennis Agersea, I believe. Good luck spelling that.
I'm Katie Archer, and James and I own 40, and I've really only been working with 40 for a year, almost exactly a year, but I've always been associated with 40. We've been married together for 10 years, and we have 2 sons, and it's a challenge sometimes.
And I'm James Archer. I'm the managing director at 40, and I've been doing that for the last 9 years.
Okay. I bet you guys never thought that when you would introduce yourself for a panel, you'd have to say how many times you've been married or how long you've been married for.
Well, you didn't have to. I just
Yes.
did.
Okay. So, let me open up some questions. Okay. So, the first thing I want to talk a little bit about is that work-life balance. What does that actually mean to you? So, when I say work-life balance, what's that definition to you? What would be perfect, good work-life balance? Whoever wants to start.
It would be not forgetting that in addition to what you do in your business, you also have to stay alive and therefore be a healthy person and a person with some social connections.
I was just going to say basically the same thing. It's just keeping in mind that while you have to work, you know, we don't live to work, we work to live, and it's managing both sides of your life.
I think a lot of it has to do with prioritizing too. It's really just, you know, not everything is going to fit, so balance is a process of taking out all the things that won't fit and making sense of what's left.
Good job, James.
Okay. All right, so in talking with Katie Archer yesterday, she said a phrase, balance doesn't always mean equal. So how does that come into when you're talking about work and life? How does that equate? So sometimes it's not always going to be equal, and what does that look like in your life?
I think what it means is just because you have work-life balance doesn't mean some days or some weeks or some years you don't have to put in a lot of extra effort. And you know, there are times where, you know, business is tough and you have a deadline and you have to work all night through. And that doesn't mean you don't have work-life balance. It just means you have to put the other things in order when you get that opportunity.
I think part of balancing is not just time, but also how you approach things. So it's important to balance your business and have priorities, excuse me. Where also you have to commit to your spouse and commit and say, we have an appointment at 5 o'clock for dinner, and you got to keep that.
Well, I've been in business for 35 years now, and I was married through some of them and not married through others. But one thing that I prioritized in my life was getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, every morning, and running for an hour. And that was like priority 1 was getting up and running. That shifted all my other priorities, because once you have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to take care of your exercise, that means that you're not going to be out till 2 o'clock in the morning partying. So it changes, one priority changes all the other priorities.
So I would imagine all of you are very, very passionate about your work. And so there's kind of this stigma that if you're passionate about your work, all other things fall by the wayside, and therefore it's bad to be really passionate and driven about your work. What is your guys' opinion on that sort of stigma that's developed about if you're really into your work and you work long hours, that makes you a bad person that can't have relationships?
One of the things that Katie and I often talk about is sort of the metaphor of like a farm family. And that's kind of how we look at it, is that it's not that I'm doing work instead of being with my family, it's that when you own a business, your work and your family are kind of intertwined and they're interrelated, and the things I'm doing over here affect my kids, years down the road. And I think like a farm family, sometimes stuff needs to get done. It doesn't matter if you're tired, if the pigs need to be fed. You have to go feed the pigs. And running a business is kind of that way. So, really the way that we approach it is that, so it's okay for those things to blur together, and that's sort of contrary to what a lot of the popular opinion is that work and personal life should be totally separate. I don't think they should necessarily be separate. I mean, we spend a lot of time at work. Those areas should overlap and kind of work together.
I love that farm family analogy. I think that's absolutely right, especially if you're in a small business. I first put one of my daughters to work in my business when she was 13. And I had her come, when she came home from school, I had her making calls to arrange speaking engagements for clients. And my clients never figured out that she was only 13 because she learned how to conduct herself on the telephone from it. And she later became an attorney. And I've had my kids and my foster kids have worked in my business and have worked for me all through their childhoods, and I think it's a great thing, and I don't blur the distinctions at all. My friends are from my business, my family gets involved in my business. It's arbitrary to say that you have to keep things distinct. It's what makes you feel good, and what makes you happy, and what makes you feel healthy.
I'm passionate about music, and I was finding myself not playing for probably years because I was working too much. So I joined a band, and basically, when you have a commitment to somebody else, you show up. So that was a big changer for me. And they're not related at all. My business and my music have nothing to do with each other. So I think you can have multiple passions. Yeah,
part of just continuing on with what James was saying, and Francine as well, we kind of rope our kids into our business. They know what's going on. We talk about it all the time. They're around us when we were talking about it, and we started Jonah's drawing some design drawings a few years ago, and he's 8 years old, and so we're trying to bring him into that process really early, just so he kind of knows this is what mom and dad do, and so we don't separate them from it because it's important to us. And if you're passionate about something, you shouldn't have to separate those things.
So I have some very personal questions. So starting with Francine, you said you've been married 5 times. Can you tell me a little bit about whether that was relationship concerns, or how did business play into that at all?
I think business played into all but my first 2 marriages, which were when I was still teaching in college, and that one was alcoholism and the other was the guy cheated. But the father of my children and I got divorced when I went into business because he was a college professor and he couldn't stand the fact that I was working so many odd hours. And it wasn't that I was working so many hours, it was that I was working the hours that he thought that I belonged at home. So we got divorced. Then the husband, after that, I married a business partner. And we stayed, and by the way, that marriage lasted 10 years, and married to my business partner, that lasted 10 years. And that guy left me because he realized that he was gay, and he was going out to lead a gay lifestyle. And the final husband died. So, do I have an answer to the question, is it business related? Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. Marriages endure or end for very complicated and many different reasons. And you can't always say, okay, if I live my life this way, like knock it off at 5 o'clock so I can make dinner every night, that my marriage is going to last. Or, if I marry my business partner, my marriage isn't going to last. I mean, it's really a who knows.
Do you have any advice for people that might be going into, for example, couples like Katie and James who are working in business together in the same company?
Yeah, just know what you're up against and realize that you're in it together. and that you have to stay in it together. And then what I really did was I shared the clients and the business and all that with my kids, but I didn't share the financial worries. When you're running a small business, you have financial worries all the time. It's a roller coaster, up, down, up, down, up, down. And sharing that with the kids is, I think, not right, because the kids have to have some atmosphere of stability to grow up in. So while you can say, yeah, I'll drag my kids into the business, it's one thing to drag a kid into making phone calls for speaking engagements and another to have your kid making phone calls to the bank or to, or to collect from clients who don't pay.
So Tim, next question is for you. A while ago, CSI was pulling 17, 18-hour shifts. You guys were practically sleeping here. And there was a little bit of strain on your relationship with your wife. Can you talk a little bit about some of the lessons you've learned out of that?
Learn to apologize a lot. Stacy's very forgiving, and she understands because our entire relationship, I have worked those crazy hours. But I think it's important to have an ebb and flow. So you can't maintain 17 hours straight for an entire year. It's even tough to do it for 2 months. So I think as long as you speak with your partner and you express, hey, this is going to be over in 2 weeks, and I promise we're going to have 2 days together, well, whatever concession you can make, I think is very important.
So for Katie and James, you guys actually physically work in the same space. You're not only just running the business together, you guys actually sit at the same table. So how honest are you guys and open with your relationship with your employees, being a married couple running a company, and how do you have that conversation with them? If there's, like, if you guys are having strain, how does that affect working in the same space?
Well, I don't think they are under any delusions that we're not married. We are married, and they know it, and they accept it, and they roll with it really well. I don't know how it affects them. Honestly, I don't. I guess they're happy.
I think from our perspective, one of the benefits that Katie and I have that maybe not all couples have is that we're good at working through stuff. So we don't have a lot of strain and lingering arguments and grumpy feelings from the night before and stuff like that. So I mean, generally speaking, we just sort it out. And so when we come into work, we're good. We just do what we need to do. And I think to work together, you have to have that kind of relationship. It's not the kind of relationship where you can be petty, or you can have a grudge, or you can stew about something, or give someone the cold shoulder, because you just have to get over that stuff right away. And that's good relationship advice anyway, but it's, business will magnify that.
I saw you reaching for the mic, so.
Yeah, I never brought my feelings about my husband that was my partner into the business, and he never brought his about me. I mean, we basically presented ourselves to the employees as a united front, and even when I found out he was gay and he was leaving, at a point we presented that to the employees, but only after, your phrase again is good, after we had sorted it out among ourselves and the emotion was out of it, and we had a plan for how everything would move forward. Because you can whipsaw your employees if they, if they are the victim or the beneficiary of everything that's going on in your marriage.
So does the audience have any questions that they'd like to ask at this time? Now, this panel, with the exception of Francine, who's literally dragged in right now, have agreed they're comfortable with whatever questions. So.
Oh, I'm comfortable.
Yeah.
I've already told you I was married 5 times.
So before I go on to any other questions, are there things that you personally would like to know, or advice, questions that you have for the various panelists?
Or advice to share with us?
Do you have kind of like a holy grail of hours that you're like, like Francine has her 5 a.m. run, that she's like, no matter what, I don't care if the Dalai Lama is calling me, I am on that 5 a.m. run. Is there anything else that any of you guys are just like steadfast and be like, this is something I want to
sleep? I am not a person who pulls 17-hour shifts. I never have done that. I managed a business where I never did that, even when I had a lot of employees and we had deadlines. I more tried to make people back up the deadlines so that it didn't get to the point where we had to do that. And in order to do that, I invested heavily in time management classes. Like, I taught myself time management, and I trained my employees in time management, because in service businesses, you can just get run ragged if you don't do that. And that's how I developed that series of priorities. And I made sure that if I was going to get up and run, I was also going to go to bed 8 hours before I got up. And I do that to this day.
We don't really have exact times. We have indefinite time. It just needs to get done when it needs to get done. And the only time that I really say I need this time is when I'm training for a race, when I need to get out and run, and I say I need to get up at 6 or I need to go out and run at 8 or whatever it is. That's really, it doesn't, I mean, you know, if I'm really pushing, it might take 6 weeks or 8 weeks or so for that. But that's really, I mean, we try to be flexible in everything, because our kids have schedules and things that we have to adhere to, but around those things, we try to be as flexible as we can and fit in work and life where it will fit.
One thing we do pretty well, though, I think, is we do take weekends. So usually on a Saturday, you know, I'll do some work on Saturday, but usually we're doing house stuff and kids stuff and things like that. And you know, Sunday we go to church, and I very rarely work on Sunday. I might do a little bit like in the evening or something just to get caught up. But you know, we do generally try and take the weekends, especially Sunday, as a chance to sort of recharge and reset for the next week.
I have a weird personal question for you guys. How do you eat and plan meals? Because that's the biggest struggle I have. So what is your advice for planning meals?
Oh,
You eat out pretty much all the time?
I eat what I'm given.
I had a PR business for many years that had restaurant clients, and I allowed them to pay me in food trade. And so I took my kids to restaurants. I never made meals, ever, because I was never home to eat them. So my whole thing was that my kids learned how to eat out at very early ages and how to behave in restaurants. I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying, you asked me to be honest.
Yes, I did.
This year is hopefully a year for change, because I was eating at Santan 4 or 5 times last year every week.
Wow.
Yeah.
They should put your guys' picture up on the wall.
I do have my own shirt. So this year, I'm kind of a boring eater. I'm doing repetitive stuff, same sandwiches, like just brainlessly in the morning, put them together, show up to work, and to me, it's just not having to think about it and remove some of the stress of planning.
Oh, I was just going to say that, yeah, a lot of times meals are not very glamorous. It's, you know, frozen vegetables out of the freezer. It's just like, you know, you make concessions where you can, and you do have to eat out sometimes. You do have to, you know, you just do your best with the day that you're given.
That's right.
I was going to say, Katie, for us, dinner is the tough one. So we try to buy things that are quasi-healthy, that are quick, but stuff like breakfast and lunch, we can throw together a pretty decent.
No, that's where I struggle too.
And I just eat all day. We usually get like vegetables, steam them on the plate, and then grab like something from Costco that you can just as an entree and throw together real quick for dinner.
Shayna, you have a question? Oh, no, go ahead.
I'm wondering, especially with two spouses or two partners that are equally busy or both busy, how do you keep track of each other's schedules, kind of going along with that meal planning, figuring out who's going to be where and when?
I can answer this. We share the same Google Calendar. So James' stuff is on, I can see his stuff and he can see mine. And sometimes we even just have like, okay, what do you got going on tomorrow? Let's just talk through that. I got this. Okay, you go and do that. La la la. I mean, it's really just like and it sounds a little helter-skelter, and maybe it's not the most efficient system, but it's one that works for us. And then as far as meals go, we just do the best we can. Like, we walked in, I brought my kids last night. We brought in, everybody had the Subway last night because James needed a sandwich for dinner. So we had family dinner in one of the back conference rooms. I mean, it's not always glamorous. It's not always beautiful. But, you know, we're doing the best with what we got.
discover the crock pot. The crock pot is an awesome thing where when you come home from a run at 6:30 in the morning, you can throw a chicken and a bunch of vegetables in the crock pot or whatever, and at the end of the day you come home and there it is, it's still sitting there and it's waiting for you. And to me, that was an awesome help on the times when I did try to eat home.
I personally make a lot of meals during my downtime during Saturday and Sunday, and then just make a bigger portion and then just kind of eat through that up through the week. So
I totally just lost track of
my
questions because I was just thinking, so one of the things I know I personally struggle with, and I'm sure other people do, when you have a really bad day and you're a terrible liar and you can't say, oh, it was fine, I was good, and you come home and it shows on your face, how do you, like, if that happens for multiple days, and you, obviously your mood affects your family, how do you deal with that, and what are some strategies you have for that?
Well, I was married to a doctor, and we both had those issues. He would come home and somebody might have died, you know, or I would come home and something might have happened in my business. And I never believe in hiding things. I just believe in presenting them so that you can get some kind of help or solution or support or whatever, and asking for, it's one thing to say I had a terrible day, and it's another to say, this is what happened to me today. I really feel like I need some support.
I'm the bad example because I'm terrible at it. Because when I get home from work, I'm like, who would want to talk about my day? Like, I'm already done with it. I'm bored with it. But it really isn't fair to my wife because she wants to know what's going on in my life. So I think Francine hit on the head.
I'm still learning.
Part of it just comes down to, sometimes you also have to get over that stuff, and especially if you're in business together, or you're in an intense kind of business where you have work-life balancing issues, you have to adapt and reframe some of those things, and maybe not look at them as terrible as they might seem like they are. And sometimes just having a more optimistic view on it can help straighten that out. And I think sometimes once you reframe things, the day wasn't that bad. It's tough. You sort it out. You deal with it again tomorrow.
So we've been talking a little bit about as spouses, kind of as being the check on your lifestyle. So for single people who are working and don't have a check on their time, what would be your advice to single business owners who making sure that they're maintaining work-life balance since they don't have a spousal check?
Oh, it's much easier.
Get married.
I think that's where it varies by the individual, but they need to be social. So if you have to have a network of good friends where you can spend time, that amount of time is really going to be dependent on you. For me, I don't think I can go out more than once a week. I'm just kind of a homebody. But that's also why I joined the band, because now I'm doing something other than work. I'm doing something other than sitting home and watching TV. So I think joining some organizations, getting a hobby that you have like a weekly commitment, potentially.
Now that I'm single, I do a lot of stuff by myself. Like, I go to the movies, I make sure that I see the movies that I want to see. I can go to theater by myself. I go to concerts by myself. I go to a lot of things by myself and meet people. In fact, I go out to dinner by myself, and I sit at the bar. And I don't think I have ever been to dinner at, Hillstone, which is a place I go a lot, where I haven't met a totally interesting person at the bar with whom I've had a great conversation.
Other questions from the audience? I've got tons. I like to dig into people's personal lives, though, so. Other questions? Jay?
So for you guys personally, how do you know when things are out of balance? Like, is there what's the sign, or how do you know when you've got to that point?
A good barometer for us is just the reaction from our kids, and they kind of are like, "Where's Dad? We haven't seen him in 3 months," and and I'm really hungry. I haven't eaten since yesterday. No, so I'm just kidding, but really, they're a great gauge for us, and they help us to really prioritize our time too. So we know if we're balancing enough by how happy everybody is at home, and is the homework getting done, and things like that. That's one barometer that I can think of.
One thing that Katie and I have also found is that if we're not spending time talking together pretty regularly, things get out of sync really quickly, and we just start having misunderstandings and things like, we start getting more emotional and stuff like that. So we have to have those times to sit down at the end of the day and just talk through things and sort that out. And if we, if we have a really busy week and we're not doing that, things get more gnarly toward the end of the week, and then we kind of recognize that and realize we need to spend that time together talking through stuff.
I can tell when I'm getting burned out on work, just because I understand myself, and so I can tell that I'm focusing too much on work and not my family life and not my music. But another good indicator is when my wife and I are in a bad mood at the same time, because usually we're kind of, one person can lift the other person up, and then our sex life. When our sex life starts to wane, I definitely know we're not spending good quality time together.
I would say fatigue is a big indicator for me that my life is out of balance. Because when your life is in balance, it almost doesn't matter how many hours you're working. If everything is making you happy, then you're kind of not out of balance. But if you suddenly discover that you're tired or you're irritable, for me, I get grumpy. And the other thing is, my dogs are kind of a check on me. If I don't get up every once in a while and throw a ball or play with a dog, they'll let me know.
How do you make it okay to your inner critic to take time off?
What inner critic?
Francine, I know you have one because she's very small. For you, she's very tiny.
I beat her to death. I beat her to death years ago.
When you're really, you know that this is your business, this is your livelihood, this is how you're taking care of your kids, your family. You know that you've got to, keep playing ball, but you need some time off. You need some time off. How do you make it okay to yourself and to your clients that time out, we're taking a weekend, or time out, this has got to happen?
Well, I think you're pretty in tune with yourself already, so you know it needs to happen. I think we're all entitled to time off, and I think that's a really important part of your relationships. It's even with yourself. You're so busy in work, you don't even get the chance to be aware of what's going on with you. So I don't know that you need to do anything other than just what you did. You rationalize it, it makes sense.
So you just say, I'm out of here, see you later.
Well, I think
if you don't, no one else will.
We had a little Monday night family meeting this past Monday, and we just kind of talked as a family about some goals that we want for the new year, and we made a list of some of the things that we want to do. We want to go spend time at our family cabin more. We want to go to Disneyland this year. We just kind of listed those things, and so talking about them early on is going to kind of fix it in our heads. This is something we talked about that we want to do, and just making ourselves follow through with that is, I think, the biggest part of it.
There's also the issue of sometimes you really love what you do, and you have fun at work, and it's rewarding and fulfilling.
That's right.
And you don't always have to leave that to be fulfilled. And I don't probably take as much vacation time as I should. But on the other hand, I don't know that I would ever use up all my vacation time for the year, because I love coming in here, and I'm happy doing what I do.
When you practice yoga, it teaches you about balance, because every time, a good yoga teacher always tells you, every time you show up for a yoga class, you've done the most important thing. You've taken some time for yourself. You've shown up. So when you show up somewhere that isn't, and that reinforces, if anything's going to silence the inner critic, it'll be a yoga teacher saying, you're here, definitely not at work, you're doing the right thing. And after a while, you get that reinforcement to where the inner critic does go away. And you're like, hey, I deserve this. I deserve yoga. I deserve sleep. I deserve time with my children.
I thought someone else from the audience had one. Someone else have a question? Yeah.
Well, what about those times when finding a balance is just not really an option? one way or the other. Like, there's something big at work, or let's say your wife just had a baby. Kind of need to be home more.
Not
often
pointing out
than-
anyone specifically, right?
Not
Ben?
pointing out that that may have happened to me recently, but
That's where drugs. No.
like, how do you transition in and out of those periods without losing your mind?
For us, I think the biggest thing is just absolutely being on the same page. We just know, we've just worked together for so long and as a family and with our business that we just know you just have to be in agreement that, okay, you're going to take time for this because you need to. The business needs this right now because it needs to. James was saying, has been saying for a couple weeks now, you're not going to see a lot of me in January. You're not going to see a lot of me in January. That's fine. We just know that that's something that our family is going to have to deal with for a little while, and that, you know what, January 31st is going to come and it's going to be okay, and we'll push through like we have with other things.
And again, a lot of it is support networks. For instance, when you have a baby, that is a very tough time because the baby doesn't sleep, so you're not sleeping, and your wife isn't sleeping, and everything else is still going on. So one thing that might help that is just taking about a minute and connecting with your breath to just close your eyes, connect with your breath, and breathe in 4 times and out 4 times, and in 4 times and out in 4 counts and out 4 counts. This is, like, again, something I learned from yoga, because what it does, it reframes and refocuses the autonomic nervous system. So it'll calm you down when you get, wound up into a clock spring and everything looks like it's impossible, which is how it always looks after you've had a baby. That's when that breathing can really help, and it doesn't take very long.
Another important thing to consider is that, kind of like we were saying earlier, not everything's equal, and you have to work out what your priorities are and what wins when 2 things come into conflict. And just like when if you come home from work and your kids want your attention and they want to play with you and stuff, and all you want to do is just sit in front of the TV, well, the kids win. You have to prioritize them first, they win. And so you don't have to think about all those decisions in the moment. If you have a lot of work stuff over here, but if your wife needs a lot of support with the baby over here, the wife wins. Whatever she says, just do whatever she says, she wins.
I've learned that.
It's true. Wife with new baby wins.
Other questions from the audience? So I have one last thing. You always hear these phrases, don't go to bed angry, learn how to say no. What is the phrase that you would tell someone coming up into business that either has a relationship or to maintain work-life balance? What's your phrase?
Breathe. I mean, it's just a
I'm going to get that tattooed on me somewhere.
Yeah.
Because I need to remember that.
Yoga really changed my life. About 15 years ago, I got forced into practicing yoga by a back injury. And it turned out that the non-physical part of yoga was the most helpful for me as a business person in terms of stress management and just everything that's going on in my life. Because there's always a lot going on in my life. I may not be married now, my kids may not be living at home now, but you can be sure I get those phone calls from a kid with a problem, a foster kid with a problem, somebody with no money. There's always, there's just always something. And so if you can just remind yourself to breathe so that you can slow yourself down it doesn't even take more than a minute, then you get, somehow it refocuses you.
I was going to say that the thing that I would say, or the advice I would give, is just to trust your partner, trust your spouse, trust your family, and then just assume that the other person is doing their best to follow through with their commitment.
I heard once that nobody ever dies wishing they'd spent more time at the office. And so you just have to remember what's important, make those decisions beforehand, and then stick with them.
Tim, do you have a phrase?
I think we have some more feedback over here.
Well, I really like what you said, Katie, to assume that the other person is trying to do their best. It's really, really hard to do that when you own a business about your employees, and it's really hard to do that about your misbehaving kid, and it's really hard to do that about your dog or your spouse or whoever. But if you just remember that most people who get up in the morning, they want to do well. They want to do the right thing. Very few people don't. And then if you just take it from there, it's a lot easier to deal with everybody else.
I think self-awareness is very important, kind of in line with breathing and yoga. Especially if you haven't started yet, learn what your family is willing to accept. Learn what your hobbies are going to take. I mean, kind of outline it first before you start making commitments, because if you don't say no, it's going to eat up all of your time.
This is just kind of one additional thought, but you know, you'll have to make sacrifices, like things that you like to do and some of the nice to haves get cut out. And just make sure that they're the ones sort of at the bottom of the priority list, not the top. I mean, television is not a priority, video games are not a priority, sitting on the sofa is not a priority. Those are the things that get cut out. You don't cut out time with family and those kind of things. So you have to keep the things at the top of the list and drop the things at the bottom of the list.
So I wanted to open it up from advice from our audience. So our panelists were invited because they have rather unique situations, but what advice do you guys have that's worked in your families or in your friendships that you would like to share with the group that you feel everybody can benefit from?
It's a program I did in 2003 called Landmark Education There's a program that I did in 2003 called Landmark Education that I'd highly recommend to anyone. It's 3 days and an evening. It's, I think, $515 right now. I was divorced in 2008, remarried in 2011, have an extraordinary relationship with my wife, and my relationship with my kids and friends is phenomenal. And in the face of any circumstance, this course gives me the tools to have freedom, peace of mind, and full self-expression.
If that's something, when you're talking about what do you do when you have a bad day and you come home, I have been the recipient of this, and I think I've also been guilty of it many times, but there is a big difference between working through disappointment or anger without being angry at the person you're working through it with. There is a pretty big difference. And I came home, for example, my wife was upset with some contractors that I work with that are working on the house, and she was basically yelling at them through me. And that's not okay. And so I've kind of learned the difference. So when you have had a bad day, just make sure you're not taking it out on the person that you're working through.
Other examples, feedback, things that have worked? Oh, I thought you were going to say something. There we go.
What you eat affects your brain, which affects your mood and your state of mind and your ability to think and focus and remember, all of which obviously will impact your ability to do things that will make your business successful. So eating whatever is available may harm what exactly you're here to do.
I think Troy would agree with you with that. I'm actually getting ready to get married, which I think most of you guys know, and so this is weird for me because most of my friends actually aren't getting married and are choosing to have sort of free-flowing relationships, so we're the odd ones. And so the one thing that I'm very open about is Tyler and I are very proactive as opposed to reactive with problems. So we started going to counseling before we ever got married.
Oh, that's very smart.
And I think that's one thing. And I think another thing is also as someone who's about to get married is I've surrounded myself with couples who have healthy marriages. I mean, I'm fortunate to have parents that are still married after 35 years. Tyler's parents are at 37. So we're fortunate to have parents, but obviously they're a little out of touch. I mean, they've been married 30 years and I'm not even married yet. So we've actually surrounded ourselves with couples that are married under 5 years. And so they've really helped with some of that, what's the first 5 years going to look like versus what's 40 years going to look like. So for those of you who are in relationships, surrounding yourself with couples who are very open and realistic about their relationships and what sucks. Like, I now know that I should really be ready at about 7 years and 10 years for bad things to happen when things start to get out of whack. But that's really been helpful for me. But I think mostly being proactive versus reactive, not, you know, there's going to be problems. So knowing that and preparing for it has been really helpful in our relationship. So other good things to share with the group? No? Okay. So if you wouldn't mind thanking our panelists and all of you for sharing your